I thought it would be a great idea to break down the major world religions and doing a Capturing the Essence series on this. So this is the first video, Capturing Christianity, how to develop a reasonable level of faith within the religious system of Christianity in this case. And we'll look at that throughout all the world's religions. And so one of the things we want to look at is, what do the enemies of a faith system say about the system itself? And how does that uphold the truth within the religious organizational system? And Christianity is really interesting in that because there's so many detractors from Christianity, it being probably the main religion of the Western faith world. Now, what's interesting about that is it's an Eastern religion, but it's taken up dominance in the West. It's a religion out of the Middle East, but it's dominant in the Western thought system, which is highly interesting. You know, one of the detractors of Christianity is an atheist New Testament scholar, Bart Ehrman. Gary Habermas talks about this a lot in some of his videos online, which I highly recommend. Bart Ehrman gives 15 independent sources for the crucifixion of Jesus within 100 years of his death. And what's interesting is that is a very, very small time period. That Bart Ehrman, this atheist, has identified 15 independent sources saying that Jesus was actually crucified. And this is one of the building blocks of Christianity, that if he was crucified, not only did he exist, but he also lived. And if he existed and he lived and he had historical sources for the existence and the living and the death of a person, you have historical context within that person residing. And so that separates Christianity from a lot of the other faith systems that are more ethereal in nature, that there's never a history tied to an actual person. They are more outside of time. They are more non-historical types of figures, aspirational figures, if you will. And so one of the things that Bart Ehrman said was that if it was necessary for Christ to be crucified, and you've got all these sources that stipulated this. Now, again, this is an atheist, by definition, an enemy of the Christian faith, said that if he died, he also lived. And so if there's all this evidence that Jesus died on the cross by crucifixion and also that he lived, it's a simple argument because it provides two grounds. Number one, an enemy of Christianity provides evidence for Christianity. That, of course, your adherents are going to assent to the truths of the religion, but whenever your detractors, whenever the enemies of your religion assent to the truths of the religion, and they do such in a historical and a highly research critical context, that is very additive to the truth of the religion. And secondly, this evidence comes, in Bart Ehrman's own words, within 100 years. This was a very narrow time period, very, very close to the source. Again, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, and it's very, very close to the source, within 5% deviation of the actual life of Christ. And so you have this happening over and over again. You think about in the New Testament, you have this story about Paul, or this Pharisee named Saul, who was converted on the road to Damascus. He was hit by a blinding light. He was blinded. Now, what was he doing on the road to Damascus? He was carrying a letter that would allow him, from the Roman magistrate, that would allow him to persecute and to enslave Christians. He was someone that fought against Christians. In fact, it said that he actually held the coat of one of the people that stoned the first martyr, Stephen, to death. That he was there looking on and giving his approval into the death of one of the original disciples of Christ. And so he was someone that was an enemy of the faith. In fact, he carried this letter with him on the road to Damascus. And this idea that Paul, the enemy, is suddenly hit by a light on the road and is changed. He literally capitulates. He literally pivots. He literally repents of his entire way of life. And 3 days later, he's visited by a prophet and his sight is restored. And he's a changed man. He becomes a utmost proponent when he was the antagonist. He was the enemy, and now he is the greatest intellectual debater of Christianity, and also one of the greatest writers of Christianity. He wrote in 7 letters that he was an eyewitness to the actual people that believed in Christianity, that were the main cohorts of Christ when he walked the earth. So he went to Jerusalem. He says this in 7 different places, and he went to go get to know Peter and James, who's the brother of Jesus, and also John. He spent time with these people. He knew these people. And so not only was he hit by this blinding light and this voice from heaven, "Why are you persecuting me, Paul?" This voice of Jesus Christ himself, in Paul's own words, but he also went and spent time with the eyewitnesses to this personhood. So he was approached by the post-resurrected Christ, and he was also in touch with and research and did the fact-finding, the back research to who Jesus really was. And so you have an enemy of Christianity who's radically converted in a way that led him to become one of the strongest proponents of Christianity. And the historical evidence is deafening, especially when it comes from your enemies. And so it sets up from those who are in the Christian faith that this is the case, that it is a historical certainty that not only that Christ lived and he crucified and died, but also that he was resurrected, that it happened at one point in history. And so what does that somehow mean? What does that mean if we want to have a reasonable faith in Christianity, that we want to capture Christianity at its essence? It means a handful of things. In fact, it means 5 things. First of all, it means that Jesus was born at a specific time under a certain Roman magistrate and to a specific bloodline, which was prophesied by a dozen Jewish prophets in the Jewish scriptures. Now remember, Jesus was Jewish, but he was fighting against the Jewish system. The scriptures themselves and the adherents of the scriptures back then, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were Jesus' enemies. But their very own scriptures foretold where Jesus would be born, what he would be called, how he would die, how he would live, and what the meaning of his life would be. And so your enemies predicted how you would act. Hey guys, I really hope you're enjoying the topic so far today. If there's anything that you would like for me to talk about next, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Love to hear great ideas about videos, stories, historical encounters, philosophies, world religions that you'd like to hear about. Comment below. Let's get back into today's topic. Secondly, he lived a perfect life, that he was the perfect sacrifice, that it was necessary for God in his justice to have a trade-off, that we as mankind who sin, who rebelled against God, are responsible to God to make amends for that. We owe God our very lives. But instead of slaughtering us, God himself came in the form of Jesus and gave up his life on our behalf, that we may somehow, some way live through that death. And so he also died a perfect death. This is step number 3. He not only lived a perfect life, but he died a perfect death. And that number 4, he was raised back to life, that death couldn't hold him down. And Jesus says that he has in his hands the keys to death and Hades, that he's overcome death, he's overcome Hades. And so he is the firstborn of the resurrection. And if there's someone that's firstborn, that means there's others to come behind him. And Christians believe that he is the ascendant, he is the first ascendant on high, and he will lead a host of captives in his train into resurrection. And somehow, step number 5, this 5th principle of Christianity, this somehow restores our relationship with God. This somehow sets us right with God, and that our imperfections, our sin, our unholiness, our blemishes, which were not pleasing to God originally, are now pleasing to God because he somehow looks on Jesus instead of looks on us. He sees Jesus as holy, and Jesus asks his holiness to be applied to us, and we're able to make relationship with God. So these are the 5 principles of Christianity, these essences, these captured Christianity points. Jesus was born, he lived a perfect life, he died a perfect death, he was raised back to life, and he somehow restores our relationship with God. And so what does this mean? I would submit for your consideration 2 things. First of all, I would ask you if you're looking at why I should have a reasonable faith. Now, when you're looking at the ocean, you're looking at something that has been there forever. But then you also think about the idea of a ship. If there's a ship that has passed by, how would you ever know the size of the ship unless you were to see the ship? How would you know whether it was a small ship or a great ship? You see, the way that you know the size and the magnitude and the depth and the weightiness of a ship that passes by is by the waves it creates, by the water it displaces, by the energy that impacts the infinitesimal ocean. The size of the ship means the size of the waves and the size of the impact. And secondly, if this is true, what does it mean that we're sitting in over 2,000 years Anno Domini, and the time period before that is before Christ, that even Christianity, even in Islam, even all the other world's great religions use the birth of Christ as the determinant of time, and all we have is time. In fact, We are half-dimensional beings. We already lost the time behind us. All we have is today and the hope for tomorrow. But all that we have is measured literally in years from the birth of Jesus Christ. And hopefully this gives you an idea of the essence of Christianity, how to capture the essence of Christianity. We'll go on and film sessions on all the other world's religions, but hopefully this overview, this summary, gives you a great idea of the essential principles, what it means, what the detractors say, and how that lends credibility to the backbone of Christianity. Hey guys, if there's certain questions you want to ask me, hit me up over on Twitter or comment below. Love to hear from you.